Fantasy has been through a lot of highs and a lot of lows, but through it all the franchise has always managed to survive, even when it looked like it definitely was not going to. No greater game highlights both the lows and the highs than Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 being the definition of the lows. Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 was for the first time ever a game so bad that Square Enix's previous CEO, Yoichi Wada, had to apologize for the game's existence and express concern about the damage done to the Final Fantasy brand, a brand that typically was known for its pristine releases, released something of absolute low quality. And this was no understatement. Square Enix's earnings were down 91% that year due to Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. It even led people to wonder if the company would file for bankruptcy. Yet, flash forward to today, and now Final Fantasy XIV is considered to be one of the greatest Final Fantasy games of the modern era, and one of the greatest MMORPGs out right now, even managing to steal dozens of players from World of Warcraft. And with each expansion pack that comes out, each of these review scores increase higher and higher, with their average review score steadily climbing. Its latest expansion pack, Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, is currently the highest rated game on PC and PS4 of 2019. And it doesn't stop there either. Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers is the highest rated Final Fantasy game in 13 years. That's right, the highest rated game in 13 years. Currently sitting on Metacritic at a score of 92. With the last Final Fantasy game even coming close to this being Final Fantasy XII. The man behind the game's rescue and consistent quality increase is none other than Naoki Yoshida. Because of Naoki Yoshida and his team's impressive ability to not only reinvent Final Fantasy XIV in such an impressively short amount of time, they also created one of the most successful projects that Square Enix has ever made both critically and financially, and they've managed to continue to increase its quality as time has gone along. It's really got me thinking, should Naoki Yoshida be the one to continue the Final Fantasy franchise even further? Should he be the one to direct Final Fantasy XVI? This man has the most solid track record out of any director at Square Enix at the moment, though there's still quite a few things to note here. The first being that I can't imagine how difficult it would be to continue to maintain Final Fantasy XIV, as well as continue a project that is ambitious as the next mainline Final Fantasy. And the next thing may seem somewhat contradictory, but he might actually already be working on it. Back in April of this year, Naoki Yoshida's development team began recruiting for jobs for their next generation project, saying, quote, "Based on the former 5th Business Division, the newly launched 3rd Development Headquarters has launched a new core project following Final Fantasy XV, and has begun to challenge the next generation, calling it a new core project that follows Final Fantasy XV when they both A, did not work on FF15, and B, calling it a project that follows it up, seems to already directly suggest that Naoki Yoshida is making Final Fantasy XVI. After all, what kind of core project following up Final Fantasy XV would he be working on for a man that had literally nothing to do with it? While this next generation PlayStation 5 game does have a very strong chance of being Final Fantasy XVI, we don't know whether or not this will be a single player game or an upgrade from Final Fantasy XIV, though under the assumption that it is a single player Final Fantasy game, that is FF16, Naoki Yoshida has made previous comments before that Final Fantasy XIV's first expansion, Heavensward, would be the aesthetic and theme that he would attempt to achieve with the game, were he to direct it. As he said, he'd like to return the series to its high fantasy roots. And interestingly enough, what you should know is that as a placeholder on the job recruiting page for his unannounced next generation project, there's a piece of concept art from Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward being used as a placeholder image. How interesting. But most importantly, I think it would be great to see a Naoki Yoshida Final Fantasy XVI, if not for one primary reason, and it's something that has plagued recent Final Fantasy games. The one thing that has people engaged the most with Final Fantasy XIV at the moment, particularly Shadowbringers, is the game's story. In fact, it's being crowned as one of the best Final Fantasy stories ever written, and with all the great stories that this series has, that's no easy achievement. With Final Fantasy XIII and XV both having an overwhelming weakness in their storytelling, it's almost ironic that he's he's managed to tell such a compelling story in the context of an MMO, a genre that's usually not at all known for its tight storytelling, so bringing that narrative focus back to the single player series would be absolutely amazing. So then, what does Naoki Yoshida himself think about the prospect? His only comment when he was asked once before was, he wants to stay dedicated to Final Fantasy XIV, but if the company wanted him to, he would definitely rise up to the occasion. But with all that said and done, Ultima Weapons, do you think Naoki Yoshida should direct Final Fantasy XVI? Or would you like to see someone else at the helm? Subscribe, click the bell icon, and let me know in the comments below. And if you've been enjoying my content, be sure to check out the Patreon for the Night Sky Prince. You can be as awesome as Ichoras13, who's helped keeping this channel alive and active, with multiple Final Fantasy, Square Enix, and JRPG related videos every single week. I really couldn't have done it without your support. Shout out to Ichoras13 and the rest of the Ultima community.